Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for coming. I know it's late and we're all tired after 2 days of conferences. My name is Neumayer.
And I'm Amal Kakaiya.
And we're both Android developers working on the consumer Android app at Deliveroo. And today we want to talk about learning Kotlin as a team. Now, you might think learning something new is quite individual. Everybody has their own way of learning and their own speed. And you just have to see today at KotlinConf, like there's 60 tracks, and everybody has their own track they want to see. But we really found that we could actually leverage this and actually really learn together, and not the same. So about 1.5 years ago at Deliveroo, we started converting the Android apps from Java to Kotlin. And now that we finished this process, we want to talk about what worked for us, how we managed to share the knowledge across the team, and how we actually changed as a team through learning Kotlin together. Now, this is KotlinConf, and even though we're in this room that looks like a church, we're not here to preach the choir. You're probably already using Kotlin. Maybe you're just getting started, or maybe you've been using Kotlin for a long time. But there's always new things to learn. Tech changes so quickly, and new things come up all the time. But before we dive into how we learn Kotlin as a team, we briefly wanted to talk about how our teams are set up and some of the problems we were facing. And some of this might sound quite familiar to you. So Deliveroo is a food delivery service, and we have 3 apps to build: a consumer, a rider, and a restaurant team. And we're, I think, 13 Android developers now. And even within the apps, we're actually not working on the same team, and we work in feature team. So even some of us were working on the same code base. We weren't actually working together, but we still wanted to have an Android team of some sort. And one thing we did for that was to create a catch-up between all of the Android developers. So every 2 weeks we sit together and we just talk about a bunch of topics. And before learning Kotlin, we were really talking about super high-level things like, what's the architecture that we're building in the apps? Or which CI system are we going to switch to? We wanted to make it really relevant for everybody. And for that, we made sure that we talk about topics that really matter to everybody. So there were still very few interactions between the team, and we were still quite separate. So if I had a question, I would just ask in the consumer Android channel, because I was working with them on the same code base. I didn't know the people in the rider or the restaurant team that well, so I didn't know if they would actually want to answer my questions, or maybe they would think it's stupid. Nobody asked a question, so how did I know that they actually really wanted to help me? And within a consumer app, or in general within apps, things were a bit better, because we were working on the same code base, so we had to automatically collaborate. And one way was through code reviews. Now, we generally saw code review as a gateway to shipping. Was the feature implemented correctly? Are there any bugs in there? But there's actually a lot more you can learn from code reviews, as we found out. But we wanted to make sure that we're collaborating well. Our backend and web engineers had the issue where they were the only engineer on their team. And it was really hard for them to get code reviews because other teams had multiple engineers. So we wanted to really avoid that. So even though I was the only Android developer on my team for a really long time, and Amal was working with multiple engineers on his team, it wasn't any harder for me to get code reviews than for him, because we would all review each other's code. So I didn't really feel left out, and that was great. So how did we do this? Well, we started off by just putting a link in Slack, and whoever had time would pick up the pull request. And that worked fine as we were 3 or 4 people. Because we were requiring 2 approvals, so chances were you had to look at the pull request. But as we were growing, that didn't quite scale. I would find myself opening a pull request, realizing it's big, and thinking, somebody else will do it. And if it was still there the next day, I might actually look at it. So we wanted to change that, but we still wanted to make sure that we're collaborating well. So we decided to use the wheel. And basically you just spin it, and it comes up with a name. In this case, Anna, and I would assign the pull request to Anna. She was on holiday for over 3 weeks, so she definitely has some pull requests to look at right now. But as we were requiring 2 approvals, this would happen a lot. And it would spin it a few times, and it would always come up with the same name. So to actually get 2 people, you had to spin it like a lot of times. Luckily, one of our backend engineers, Florian, created this great script for GitHub. So now, whenever we assign a label, in our case for review, it automatically picks 2 people and assigns them to them. And if that person is on holiday, you can add a comment on the pull request to unassign that person, and it automatically finds another person. He did promise to open source this soon, so hopefully you can use this. Now, you might think, what does that have to do with Kotlin? Well, we always had one goal in mind, and that was to share knowledge. And that was really, really important, as we found out as we actually started to learn Kotlin.
So we're talking today about learning as a team, but what does that actually look like? Does you feel like Nelson here, like looking at Martin, like Team Discovery Channel, what you're talking about? But we were all learning something together, and we all had a completely level playing field. Because when we started learning Kotlin, none of us really knew what we were doing. Everyone was a beginner. It didn't matter if you'd been doing Java for 5 years or 5 minutes. Everyone started on the same level playing field. And that means that everyone's making mistakes, which is great. And people can learn at their own pace as well. It's kind of like having and also we had a couple of people leading the charge. So I think me and Maria and myself were the 2 kind of Kotlin advocates within our teams. And we were kind of like started off as the teachers in some way, but that doesn't mean that you can't also teach your peers. It actually kind of reminds me of a story of back in high school. So this is me and my mate Stuart. This is not me in high school. I would not show you a picture of me in high school. And Stuart and I used to sit together in our high school physics class. And this was just a ridiculous idea because we just distracted everybody. We just talked throughout most of the class and didn't really pay much attention. But I also really, really loved physics. So despite the fact that we weren't actually paying much attention, I was still picking up the material reasonably quickly. I can't really say the same for Stuart, though. And I think he'd agree with me, and it's probably my fault. But I have very vivid memories of being at home in my parents' place, on the floor, surrounded by my physics notes, on the phone to Stuart, teaching him what we were supposed to have learnt that day in physics. Maybe you've had a similar experience. But this basically required 2 things of me. One, I had to actually understand the material that was being taught that day, but 2, I had to teach it back to somebody in quick succession. And teaching is one of these things that really helps you to solidify whatever it is you're trying to learn. And this is what it was kind of like learning Kotlin as a team, because we were all constantly teaching each other things. It didn't matter if you were a senior member of the team or a junior member of the team. Teaching somebody is a really effective way to learn whatever it is you're trying to learn. And if you're a junior member of your team who maybe feels like you're not quite ready to contribute to senior members or you're not feeling like you're learning fast enough, there are so many forums out there where you can get involved and teach people. There are organizations like CodeBar who run workshops for underrepresented minorities in the tech community, and you can go there as a junior developer and help somebody get started in tech. It'll help you learn whatever it is you're trying to learn, and you'll help get someone else into tech. And they have this motto when they're talking about teaching somebody at CodeBar, and I feel it really represents well what you're trying to do. So they say, assume that anyone you're teaching has no knowledge but infinite intelligence. So what does this mean? This means that if you're teaching somebody something and they're not quite getting it the first time, it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're never going to get it. Maybe you need to try a different example. Maybe you need to come back another day. Maybe you need to, just take a quick break. But where can you do this? At work. The best place we found to start was in our code reviews. So Maria talked about code reviews as being a gateway to shipping. But actually, it turned out they are for way, way more than just correctness. And in our journey, converting our code from Java to Kotlin, one thing that became quickly apparent was that we had to separate the conversion from Java to Kotlin into a separate commit. And this was really, really important as part of our process. Because if you changed some logic and converted the file to Kotlin in one go, your reviewer was trying to do two things at once, which was really difficult to understand. But also, these conversions became absolute gold mines for learning language features. And we'd start doing things as an author and putting comments on the pull request and saying, oh, hey, look, here's this, remember that old cumbersome Java statement? Here it is in Kotlin. It's concise, it's readable. And we started doing that more and more as we found out more features. You'd learn a new feature, and you'd be able to implement it as part of a conversion, and you'd point it out in your code review. This meant that both the reviewers and the authors were learning something as they were going through a pull request. And this was great. But this only really involves the authors and the reviewers. Some of the concepts you're learning actually require more of you to get involved. So it's actually worthwhile to create forums for discussion. And we came up with something we called Kotlin Hour. Kotlin Hour was very similar to what we had with our Android catch-up, except it was exclusively for Kotlin. We felt it was quite important at the time to not conflate the two ideas of Android and Kotlin. So we created Kotlin Hour. In Kotlin Hour, we came in with no real agenda. And we'd just spend an hour speaking about a language feature we maybe learned recently, or we actually did a couple of things. We re-implemented our interview app in Kotlin. We went through some of the Kotlin koans, and we even watched some talks on Kotlin from different conferences as well. And this became a great place to learn. But in these situations, it's really important to keep things collaborative. If you're the person coming in with a new idea, then don't be too defensive about it. Be collaborative. And it's OK, absolutely OK, to say, I don't know. Because like I said before, everyone is learning, everyone is a beginner. And it's really empowering, especially for junior developers, to see more senior people saying, I don't know, I don't understand it. But working together, you're more likely to be able to understand it than trying to do it all separately. So a good example of this is we, at one point, were having a big debate around whether the merits of default implementations on Kotlin interfaces versus using abstract classes. And if you're familiar with Android, you might have something like this, where we had an interface like this, screen interface that our activities and fragments and base and bottom sheets and all that would implement. And in the Java way of doing things, you'd end up having to implement that function across multiple classes because there was no common inheritance hierarchy. When we were wondering, like, can we solve this with default interfaces? And we worked together and figured out that, actually, hang on, we can introduce this default screen interface that implements our old Java interface and provides a default implementation. And this was great. This meant that we could actually, instead of in our activities and fragments having multiple implementations, just take them out. Now we only have one place where this is implemented and one file to maintain, which is so much easier. But the real power here was actually the common context of our app, because this is really, really important. How many times have you maybe learned about a new concept, gone out, done a tutorial, read a blog post, possibly then put together like a reasonably trivial hello world kind of example, only then to really struggle to figure out, how does this fit in with my app architecture? It can be very difficult. But if you do this as a team together, then within your own app context, you're immediately able to understand the value of whatever it is you're trying to learn, because you can see it in action in something that's actually relevant to you. But maybe you're saying to me, Amal, I've not got time to do all this. I've not got time. My product manager is asking me to implement 10 features to ship next week. We're not going to get the chance to have 10 developers go into a room for an hour and waste 10 developer hours of time to figure all this stuff out. I say to you, you should fight for your right to learn. It's really important, actually. If you're looking for your next job, I looked at the Stack Overflow survey, and professional development is the third most important thing developers look for when they're going for their next role, after how much am I getting paid and what is it I'm actually writing. So this is actually really, really important for you to do, not only for yourself, but also for your company. if you're doing professional development at work, you're not adding value to your company, and you're also able to attract new talent, which is super important if you want to be building an awesome team. Yeah. But eventually, so when we started out on our journey, we had the goal of getting ourselves to 100% Kotlin. And eventually we did it. Job done. Right, Maria?
Cool. So we're not 100%. And yeah, we thought we're done. That's it. We converted our app, so there's no more Java code left. That's great. But really, we're never going to be done. There's always new things to learn. Everything is changing so quickly. Just today, or just the last 2 days, I spent in many different talks, and like every time I go to a conference, I go away thinking, oh, I want to try all those new things. And everybody does that, and you will always learn new things. So yes, we're at 100% Kotlin, but we haven't stopped learning Kotlin. So learning Kotlin really kind of changed how we work together in a lot of ways. We're a lot more collaborative and a lot more supportive to each other. But yeah, we're not discovering new things every day and new features, and that is fine. We're now Kotlin developers in a way, so that's cool. But running Kotlin Hour for 1.5 years really showed how important it is to share knowledge. We realized actually we're having a lot of similar problems. Even though we were working on similar apps, we still had kind of the same issues and the same problems to solve. And even if a solution or an issue you had was very specific to your use case, it can still be useful to somebody else. Maybe they don't need it right now, but maybe they will need it a year later. For example, our writer team implemented Spotless, or added Spotless integration. So now, whenever they will push code, it checks automatically that everything is conform to our style guide. And for some time, we were thinking, oh, not sure, we don't need that. But now we use that, and we could leverage the writer team and learn from their mistakes and what they've learned from integrating Spotless, and use it, and slightly improve it, and then help the writer team improve it again. So that's great. And often, we're not just talking about issues we have, we're just talking about a specific topic. Like now, in 2 weeks, we'll come back, and we'll talk about what we've learned at KotlinConf. Everybody went to different talks. Others just saw the live stream. We're all learning different things, but together we can share this knowledge and really help each other learn more. So a very similar thing happened for code reviews. As Amal mentioned, as an author, we would always put comments about things we've learned, and we're still doing that. So if you look at our pull requests, they have a lot of comments. But a lot of them are done by the author themselves. And that's great, because it gives the reviewer a lot more context about why this change was needed and what is actually happening here. But also, it gives yourself a chance to review your own code. The amount of time I will create a pull request, go through the code myself to add some comments, and find some mistakes or some things that I missed. Maybe I left some debug code in there. And we can avoid that whole back and forth between the reviewer and the author. That just takes a lot of time for all of those really unnecessary things. And we don't see code reviews as a gateway to shipping anymore. It's a really great place to learn from each other. Another thing is readability. As it was mentioned in the keynote, readability is one of the really important things about Kotlin. And we really found that it helped us a lot to make our code a lot more readable. But what does that mean, actually? And in a code review, it is really easy to spot readability issues, because as you're writing code, you write it in the IDE, and you get a lot of context around all your changes. And it'll help you, like it gives you hints about what type something is right now. But you don't have that on GitHub in your pull request. And if it doesn't make sense to somebody else, chances are it probably won't make sense to yourself half a year later. How often did you look at some code and thought, who wrote this? I have no idea what's happening here. And then you find out it was yourself a year ago. Definitely happened to me a few times. So if we find these things in code reviews, if somebody doesn't understand what something means, that generally means it might not be simple enough. But with Kotlin, you can actually simplify methods a bit too much. And this is also something you can spot. Sometimes changing that super long Java code to one line works really well, but sometimes you don't know what's happening anymore because all the complexity is hidden away, but you're not really sure what's actually happening here anymore. It also made us a lot more mindful about what actually goes into a commit. As Amal said, we would keep the conversion as a separate commit. And that meant most of our pull requests, we would actually look at commit by commit. So now we actually automatically think about what actually goes into a commit. We're no longer creating a whole feature as one commit. We think, all right, we're doing one thing here. Let's create a commit. And that makes it a lot easier to review. So all of those changes helped us to actually ship faster. And that is great, because even though Kotlin slowed us down in the beginning because we were still learning, we can now ship faster because it's more concise or readable, and because we're working a lot better together. But, so looking back at all of this, we're really happy about how everything turned out, but there's definitely some things we could have improved. First of all, we went to 100% Kotlin. And while it's really good to be able to open any class and know it's going to be in Kotlin, there's not going to be any Java code around anymore. Was it really needed? Did we really have to convert a file that nobody's ever going to touch anyways? Probably not. And I'm not just saying that because the consumer team lost the competition of getting to 100% first, just by a week. But converting a project essentially means rewriting it. If you're reviewing a conversion, the whole file changed, and to ensure there's nothing that broke or there's no logic changes is really hard. And yes, we had tests, but tests can't catch everything. And there's definitely some bugs and crashes that creeped in. We also ended up with a bunch of conflicts, as one person was converting a file and another person was using it and changing it. We usually point out in Slack, hey, I'm going to convert this file or this area. If anybody's touching it, let me know. But sometimes we forgot about that, or we weren't quite clear enough what we're actually doing. Or maybe somebody just didn't check Slack at that time. So communication really was really crucial around this whole conversion process. If you're not sharing what you're learning, or if you're not sharing what you're working on, you might end up duplicating work, and you really want to avoid that. So as we learned Kotlin, there's definitely some things we got wrong, and that is totally fine. You're always learning, you're improving, and the code you wrote a year ago probably isn't nice anymore. But that just means you're learning, and that's good. Learning Kotlin is a bit like being the kid in the candy store. You walk in and you're like, I want all of those things, and you eat them, and then you get sick because you had too much. And it's the same with Kotlin. In the beginning, we were like, oh, there's all of these new features, and we wanted to use them everywhere. And every simple Java code had to be made more Kotlin-like. But in the end, we ended up with worse code. So use the features, but where it actually makes sense. And there's definitely some things we slowed down, ended up not doing anymore, or dialed down a bit, like using a let or a when instead of just doing a simple if statement, or just nesting a bunch of scope functions, like having an apply and a let, and then also, what is it or what is this anymore? At some point, you just don't know anymore. And yes, the IDE helps you at that point right now, but you can't assume that everybody is using an IDE or is actually looking at for a code review. So a code reviews are really great to spot those mistakes where you're kind of overusing all of those features. But another thing we did is to split up our pull requests. And you might think, oh, that's a good idea. Don't make pull requests too big. But in the way we did it in the beginning was we would create a feature and at the end realize, ooh, this is a bit too big. And we'd take it apart and create part 1 to 5 of this pull request. And while we had really good intention to make it easier for the reviewer, it actually made it harder for anybody involved. As the reviewer, you still had to go through all this code and review it. And if you were going for commit by commit, it didn't change anything. And as an author, it was actually a lot harder. If anybody requested any changes in the first part, chances are that it's going to completely change how you're going to implement part 2 to 5. So that didn't quite work. So now whenever we realize our pull request is going to get too big, we're going to create a new one, or we're going to create the pull request. And we ask for a review, and if any changes are required, we can do them early. We get feedback early. And then we don't have to worry about all that future code. And you can improve your code early on. And that does mean that we have to be a bit more careful about what actually is in that pull request, because it's not going to be merged with all the other code. It's going to be merged first. So we had to ensure it's behind a feature flag, or all our tests are actually green, and nothing is actually breaking. And also to ensure that our code review process is fast, so you don't have to hang around and wait for a review for a long time, and end up implementing the next version of the PR anyways. But all that overhead was really, really worth it. Sometimes you actually want to ask feedback in advance. Maybe you're not quite sure how to implement something, or maybe it's something actually really, really important and really critical. And to actually ask in advance, is what I'm planning to do right? Can you find any issues with this? Have you done something like this before? It's really useful. And Kotlin Hour has definitely been useful for this, because we're a bunch of engineers sitting in a room together, and you can ask somebody, have you done this before? And together, you can actually come up with a lot better solution. And maybe you're actually going to pair on it, because together, you can write a lot better code and come up with different ideas and how to solve a specific problem. All right, so this is how we collaborate now, and how we actually learn Kotlin. But what does that actually mean for you?
Cool. So it actually turns out that learning as a team was a side effect of us just adopting Kotlin. And even after we finished our goal of 100% Kotlin, now we still try and solve things together as a team. So I've got a couple of things for you to take away here. And one of them is making a success, or at least from us, making a success of Kotlin Hour. And like I said before, during something like Kotlin Hour, everyone, it was a beginner. And you can all help each other to get better. You'll be more open to asking questions and sharing things you learned. It's a really great way to help imposter syndrome as well. Because when everyone's learning and everyone's asking for help and everyone's being supportive, there is no such thing as a stupid question. But we only really invited the Android team to Kotlin Hour. We put a message out in our general engineering channel saying, like, we're doing this thing, we're learning this language, do you want to come along? There's no agenda. But that kind of turned people off, I think. I think we should have actually not just invited people and advertised people, but clearly given them a clear value proposition. And we made a mistake of not doing this. If you got a calendar invite for an hour with a bunch of engineers, would you just go to it? Like, I'd be like, what's the point of this? I've got more important things to do. We had a bunch of other developers at the time that we were doing Kotlin Hour trying to learn Scala, and they were trying to implement Scala on some of our backend code. Maybe if we'd been a bit more clear about what we were trying to achieve with Kotlin Hour, maybe they'd made a better decision. But yeah, and this also means that if you're inviting more people and getting more people involved, you can tap into the collective psyche of the engineers within your organization. And this is really important, because if you've got you might have processes at work like design reviews or what are they called again? RFCs, requests for comments, where a bunch of engineers all get together and figure out a common solution that they can agree on to something. And maybe if you're not getting involved with these kind of things, you're thinking, oh, that's just a back-end thing, they'll figure it out. Well, like I have done several times, it can actually be really, really valuable for you to go along to these sort of things, because even though you have a different perspective, that can be really valuable in a diverse room such as that. Another key takeaway I've got for you is to share whatever it is you're learning. So whether it is a new feature you've learned here at KotlinConf, or maybe something you knew previously, make sure you share it with the rest of your team. And where can you share these things? Code reviews, like I said before. Code reviews are for more than just correctness. As Maria spoke about, we now use code reviews as not just a gateway to shipping, but a place to learn. So when we're reviewing things commit by commit, I'm now happy to pick up a pull request, even though it's big, because I'm hoping that I'm going to learn something along the way. So, yep, something like, if you want to create something like Kotlin Hour, or like another forum for upskilling your team, make sure that everyone's invited, and make sure you're sharing everything that works for you. Yeah, like I said, share the content that works for you. And, more importantly, if it doesn't exist, make it. If you can't, the chances are, if you can't find something that you're struggling with, if you learn it yourself and put something out there, people will find value from it. A good friend of mine wanted a good TDD Swift tutorial, but she couldn't find anything out there. So she wrote a 6-part tutorial over Christmas, published it, and it is now the top Google result for TDD Swift. So you're probably not the only one if you're struggling with something. And lastly, learning has no definition of done. We're never going to be done with learning, and even though we're done with our Kotlin conversion, there's always going to be something new to learn. But if we learn things together and as a team, it's always going to be much faster and more enjoyable. So I encourage you to learn together and not the same. Thank you.